Along the lines I've been talking about, something that many of you should feel already, and I'll go ahead and put some flesh and bones on it, via the great, ever popular spoken word. I've talked around the edges of this, but let's see if by now some of you can see it head on based upon your own experience and what you have been able to make out of the maps I have been sketching out. There is an absolute necessity for a perceived enemy. Absolute. Without resistance, nothing can change, and when you get good, you can see or grow. But you can start out at a rather simplistic level, since everyone can talk about change, even ordinary people, that things change, and to them, oftentimes things get worse. There must be the absolute perception of resistance. Now, as always in this dual world, this dually perceived world, people feel as though there are two possible sources of resistance. They feel as though there is resistance that comes from without, and they feel as though there is resistance that comes from within. I'm going to leave it to you, if any of you are interested, to look at yourself and to look at life without me giving any hints as to any sort of percentage. I think that it's safe enough for me to go ahead and point out to you that everyone experiences at the dual level of consciousness a perception of both possibilities occurring, intermingled, changing places. If you studied the matter in a fairly direct manner, I suggest you would find that there are times that it can apparently flip-flop right before your very eyes. In the former territory would include all that appears to be, in my equation of I plus not I, or the environment plus genetics equals everything, as that there is no shortage of resistance from without. That everyone at the dual level of consciousness is correct in their assumption that were it not, by and large, for the resistance from without, that they could all, one and all, be captains of their fate, engage in almost absolute magic, would see the fruition of all their plans come to pass in a fairly straightforward manner. But there is always resistance. Resistance all the way from that which appears to be someone who is perhaps even genetically your counterpart, that no matter what you do, that there is somebody, maybe somebody individually, that you can identify, family, friends, employees, acquaintances, that there seems to be someone that is always resisting you. Then there is the resistance, apparently, of humanity in general, of your great ideas, and the patent office won't even answer your letters. People who hear of your invention immediately fall on the floor, consumed by fits of laughter. Just the general folly, the insensitivity of humanity is resistance. Then within is the resistance that seems to come. I'll go back and use my fairly recent description of everyone being born into a partnership with you, and there's some other something that seems to be inside of you. That the partner offers resistance, and the partnership seems to offer resistance. You might make a subcategory, again, in a twofold manner. That it seems as though either the partner, that is, voices in you, are resisting that which you apparently want to do, or, in this great binary world, that the partner talks about doing something that you find totally unacceptable. I know that there's still people, well, probably all of you on a bad day, would feel as though that is two different things. Of course, ordinary people would, the ordinary contemporary people that would still be involved with the idea of an unconscious mind that has been by and large programmed through the environment since you were born. That this unconscious mind and anything it might have up its sleeve is certainly different from an ordinary person and their conscious mind. But on a good day, I know by now that some of you might suspect that there is no great difference between the descriptions I gave. That is, that at times apparently there's something that you want to do or that you have dreamed about for years, and the partner is always resisting, like you can't do it, it's immoral, it's illegal, you'll get caught, my, what will people think? And that which appears to be the partner that periodically talks to what seems to be you, that you're just minding your own business, nothing particular to do, and here comes him or her again with these dreams. Maybe it's so despicable that it doesn't really talk about it, just shows you pictures. This variation of you want to buy a dirty postcard, and it's your partner, he shows you these pictures, and apparently you go, heavens. Heavens, ye gads, gadzooks. Within the map that I'm trying to get you to look at tonight, there is a continuing resistance, but notice the number of names it goes under. Notice the wide variations of pictures. All of humanity is programmed to believe in the straight line phenomenon. Everyone is wired up for reasons that I have hinted at, and I've given examples. I'm just putting a new coat on it in case you don't notice right now, that everyone believes that they would be better off, humanity would be better off, if there were not resistance. It seems to be, to say the least, self-evident that there are just things that surely are innately true, that would be better, based upon you and your forefathers, let us say, it would be better if everyone would be a Christian, if everyone would be a Buddhist, if everyone would be a humanist, if everyone would be something, if everyone would just be decent. And of course, each of you, everyone knows what being decent is. But there are people in the world who are not decent. There are people in the world who have never been decent. And you're back to that which makes the poor people in the theological seminaries have to go to bed and play with themselves. Nobody can understand it. But there seems to be absolutely no doubt. There's just no doubt. There's nothing to discuss that we do not need resistance. All of religion, from the most philosophically inclined religion to the crudest religion, is all based upon a binary idea. As I told you, it is really the ultimate conspiratorial tale, that there are the good gods, the good forces, and the bad gods, or the bad forces. And that in some way humanity is here to struggle against the bad forces. That is in some way our duty, that is surely what we are here for, is to overcome the bad, to resist the resistor. I should not have to spend any more time talking about this. You just simply must feel it. There's not anything that arcane, and it is not really philosophical. It is simply in your life that, hey, there are things I'd like to do. There are things I'd like to do that would help not only me, but there are things that would probably help humanity. At least they're innocuous to the general health of life. But there are things, ideas I've had that I would like to do that are good. As soon as I try to do it, somebody is always resisting it. All the way from saying you can't do it, it's impossible, for somebody saying, well, you have the whole thing backwards, that would not really be of any benefit to anyone. There's resistance, whether you're religious or not. that if the resistance is not coming from evil forces, the resistance is coming from non-right thinking people. I have given enough tasks, I have drawn enough maps that you should have some perception of this on a clear day, even if you're not in San Francisco. There must be the perception of an enemy. All that I have tried to drag out and to sketch at and to hint at about religions really doesn't play much purpose any longer for those of you who have followed much of it, and from those of you coming into this anew, things are changing fast enough out in ordinary life that none of you should really be hung up upon your forefathers' mythology. But you should notice that it is built in to, if not the overt teachings of some religion to which you still want to stare, all the way from that to the general humanistic philosophy that there is a better way to live and a less desirable way to live, and what we're here for, if not on a religious basis, just on a humanitarian basis, just on a sophisticated, civilized basis, we have got to overcome the resistance to that which would be good and humane. There is nothing to overcome, because nothing would happen unless there was the perception of resistance, the perception of an enemy. I am still convinced that not enough people heard last week when I enlarged upon the story of the regal collusion and pointed out to you how everyone is wired up to be a sitting duck, a ready audience for conspiratorial tales, and how they've always been around. But my story about the two princes, I am convinced that not enough of you heard it in the right way. And the right way to hear it to start with is just take it that could literally be true. And then try to run, after you grab that, try to run in a direction not yet known, because you can't stay there with a conspiratorial tale. But the two princes absolutely understood that for the benefit of all of our people, yours and mine, which is, let's assume that constituted the whole known world, there has to be the appearance of an enemy. There has to be the perception, the feeling of a continual conflict, that right across the border from Kingdom A, C Prince, over to Kingdom B of the D Prince, there must be the continuing sensation of impending resistance, that there is danger, there is someone who is against us, whether it is in being engaged in overt warfare at the time, or whether it seems to be merely a war of words, a war of threats. There has to be, they decided, just without any doubt, we have got to keep the people in this kind of state, always prepared for war, if not actually engaged in warfare. Now you can look at the way in which I was attempting to draw your attention in regards to the partnership, that you and the voice seems to be engaged in a continuing kind of resistance. Right now, forget about what appears to be the external resistance of other people. How much time is spent? I'll assume none of you can answer this as soon as I ask it, because if you did, you'd immediately break down and cry. It'd make you feel so bad. So I'll assume that none of you will suddenly go, now that you mention it, I know. The question was, how much time have you spent of your life, just your horizontal lifeline, of you and the partner engaged in this resistance? How much time? It's good. I hear a few laughs, and I don't hear any crying, because if you knew, and assuming you valued your time even at 1/10 the minimum wage, you would be in no mood to laugh. Well, even if while I'm saying this and some of you chuckling, all of you, there should be at least one or two major dreams or nightmares immediately come up into the yellow circuit in regards to what I'm talking about, of something that either you or the partner apparently has been talking about since you were a teenager. And it's never moved. It's still there. If we were ordinary people and talking in ordinary psychological terms, we could say, well, this is certainly a fertile area for a kind of psychological analysis of oneself, because something should be done about this. You're right. There are people, perhaps all of us, said the psychologically inclined person, have a series of dreams, a series of unconscious desires that in some way we have picked up through the traumas and the unexpected events of our childhood. And they're little patterns, they're little games that we seem to be playing with our own unconscious, and they go around and around over and over and over, and they never seem to get resolved. So through some kind of analysis, through some kind of interpersonal reaction to others, under the guise of a friendly analyst, that we could surely get somewhere with this, and it needs to be eradicated to live a more profitable life. I guess I'll make it one of my asides again. Some of you should already be a sentence ahead of me. If they could do such a thing, we're talking about an act B, it sounds like it's possible, but if it was possible to take ordinary people and do away with this internal, the appearance of an internal resistance, they would not have a freshly scrubbed, awakened, enlightened person. They would have someone, if I must diagnose them in verbiage, they would have someone who would be the first case of potentially, on the horizontal level, potentially terminal ennui. You would have finally a world's most successful hermit. You would have someone who would collapse into a pile resembling, I assume, stewed prunes, and they would never move. If they could do that to someone, I assure you that the person to whom it was done would not then say, "Boy, may I shake your hand? I've never felt so good." Which, if for no other reason, should show you why psychology, just like religion before it, cannot do what it says it's about. You could look at this internal resistance. As I started to say, you could look at it for a moment or so of you and the partner as being the C and the D prints. Within it all seems to be a matter of C or D, whether it seems to be, quote, you, and then this voice, the partner, or vice versa. At one time you may seem to be C. Another interesting thing that I should really make parenthetical is where does the decision come from that, hey, this is me, and then that's not me. But of course, since that has no bearing on this, I won't. We'll bypass that. We'll go right on to the Wagner Beltway. If not the Barstow Cutoff. You could look upon you and the partner, you and this voice, you and this unconscious mind, as being the C and the D prints. And that's all. That's the basis of the resistance. Now, another description of what this has always been about comes into the missing part of this regal connection, Prince E. Now, insofar as I pointed out that, for instance, psychology or religion or anything is not, with an ordinary person, ever going to eradicate this perception of an internal enemy, this perception of a continuing unprofitable, untoward, undeserved, unrelenting, uneverything resistance. But a description that I can make of this under any guise at any time and place is to turn that internal regal collusion of C and D into a triaxial collusion. Although I must say, if you get in the third partner, it's no longer even the perception of a collusion. But if you could bring in a third one, you've got the two princes that understand. Jump back and forth right quick, if you will, between my last week's description of the regal collusion and what I'm talking about now of trying to see the two princes as being you and the partnership. But all the things that my fictional princes sat there and did on a regular basis of meeting, and none of the people knew it, none of the populace had any knowledge whatsoever that the whole situation was anything less than serious, sincere, real, that this conflict, this simmering resistance, this hostility between the two nations was as real as their own breath. The same sort of apparent resistance that everyone feels, that all of you still feel to some degree. That there is a resistance that you don't notice is just part of being alive. To you, it's as much as being alive as these two kingdoms, except the resistance of this other camp. Continuing war of propaganda, of threats. You hear their sabers rattling across the border. It goes from that to a continual or periodic outburst of overt warfare with casualties. In the same way that they cannot conceive of existence without that. You could not suddenly plop down in either of those two nations and try and talk to them about a world sans any hostility, a world without any perception of an enemy. It is literally, it would be inconceivable. They could hear the words, but their genes are not wired up to even feel it theoretically. You can't talk to them about it. In the same way, living an ordinary life, you cannot conceive of it. I can talk about it. You've read description of it before you met me in religious books and all sorts of books, whether people had any understanding of it or not. The kind of verbal descriptions have been lingering around humanity forever. But you cannot really conceive of it until you experience it, because your days, every minute, is some kind of resistance. It's necessary. It's not a sin. It's not the payments for some past sin of your forefathers. It's not because you're a pawn in a great battle between good and evil. It is being alive, but you ordinarily do not conceive of it. It's sitting there. I pointed out some of this years ago. Shouldn't be a secret. There's resistance. There's air pressure, or you couldn't breathe. There is resistance, as it's called, with gravity, or you could not sit down. We'd all be flying around the room. I would really have to hold on to the podium, and then my feet would be going up and all of that. Nobody could write me notes on a piece of paper. Nobody could write great books. There has to be resistance. If you're going to pick up a pen and write on something, there has to be resistance. If you are attempting to engage yourself in what humanity calls change, there has got to be resistance. There has got to be the appearance, your perception. And it's a living perception. It's not something that you have picked up. It is perception in that. It's in the genes. It's in the very life cells of us within the body of life, that there is a continuing resistance. If you attempted to change, and everyone believes they should be changing, that's part of the outcome of you and the partnership. It was part of the outcome in this regal collusion that the two countries, each group thinks they should be doing something differently. You could say the ultimate feeling of Kingdom A should be doing something is to absolutely wipe out Kingdom B, and then perhaps we could learn what peace is. Perhaps then we could live a life of freedom. Our economy would increase, we'd have more free time, the arts would flourish, our philosophers would have time to philosophize. But now we spend most of our time, a lot of our gross national product, preparing for war and fighting war. If it weren't for that, we'd really flourish. Whereas, as I told you last week, the two kings found out their forefathers somewhere. Remember, I just made this story up. But their forefathers found somewhere that contraire, assuming there was a time when there was absolute peace, which there wasn't. But if there was, they realize this is not good. This is not good for anybody. But if you or your partner decides to change, there has to be even there has to be resistance, and it is as real as the so-called laws of physics I drew out, pointing to you that there has to be air pressure for your lungs to work. For you to breathe or you'll die, there has to be resistance of a type between you and gravity, for you to be able to move and lift a foot and it comes back down, and so on. In areas that would seem to be non-physical, it's the same kind of resistance. If a man is drinking a fifth of Jack Daniels a day, and neither he nor his partner has a bad word for it, he will never stop. He will not only never stop, he'll never suffer over it. Up here, his liver is another matter. If a person continues to put on weight, continues to eat more than they are burning up, and there is no resistance inside, neither they or their partner ever says a word about it, you'll never see those persons checking the latest diet in the National Enquirer. Any idea of change is absolutely based upon the requirement that internally you, or apparently either you or the partner, has got to be resisting it. That the man continues every day. He drinks in the morning, he drinks in the afternoon, and let's say that it doesn't matter. But let's say that apparently it's him doing it. As far as he is concerned, if he heard my description and I asked him, and he would say, yeah, it's me. But there is a voice in me. He might call it conscience. He might call it my rational self. But he would be aware, I know I'll stand here and drink. I'll take the first drink in the morning, I'll go, mm-mm. And at the same time, there are voices in me that say, Hubert, you got to cut down. You shouldn't be drinking. They've been saying it for years, and I know it's true. Maybe it's the voice of the guides talking to me. He may or may not quit. But there has got to be the perception of a resistance. There has got to be a voice speaking. Some of you should see by now that it sounds a lot like what many people throughout the world speak of as being some kind of conscience. There has got to be the perception of an enemy. There's got to be resistance, or no one would try to change. No one would try to go on a diet. No one would try to cut down or stop drinking. No one would do anything without this internal. Remember, I started out and said that there is the appearance that there are two sources. There are people around you can be saying, you drink too much. Or the people that are saying, hey, you ought to cut down your food. Or the Goodyear company's probably going to hire you as a replacement for their standard blimp. People can say that, but if there is not the internal appearance of resistance, nothing happens. The person will not show any signs of being interested in altering what they're doing. There has to be the internal perception of the regal collusion. There has to be the internal perception that there is a C and a D going on. There has to be the internal perception that there is something in me that knows and speaks to me about what would be best for me, and then there is that, on the contrary, that makes me do that which is not in my best interest. One description, as I said, of what this is about is to be able to produce, to be able to recognize, to hear, to take him into the partnership. He may already be there, but I wasn't going into that tonight. But for you to consciously be aware in a higher place, there's no longer just me and the old partner, there's now somebody else. And to say the very least, that changes the whole complexion of the situation. Even though I'm not given to great promises, I'll put it to you this way. When I said an ordinary person, if they could be freed from the appearance of this binary form of continuing resistance internally, that they would not be pleased with it. if you can do it through the kinds of efforts that I have been talking about, if you can do it yourself, I suggest to you the possibility that you might find it not unpleasing. To have no perception, take in any case you can find in you now, but to be without the perception, without the continuing sensation that there is a conflict in me, that I know what I should be doing just all over the place. Here and there, and almost everywhere, I know what I should be doing, and damn it, I don't know, I just don't do it. And I can't stop thinking about it. Of course, ordinary people don't even get that far. Because if ordinary people got that far, they too would be moaning and crying. It is as much being alive as it is to be binarily blinded. But anything that you can perceive, that which you can think of right now, as being part of just my continuing life, that's as much about me as sitting around worrying about this and that. And it might be something fairly mundane. That for 20 years I've been saying I've got to lose weight. For 20 years I've been saying I've got to cut down on drinking. For 20 years I've been saying I've got to find a different kind of sexual partner next time. For 20 years I've been saying I've got to go back and make myself religious. Whatever it is, it's all the same thing. You're just playing out a different part in life's body, but it's all a matter that there has to be the perception of a conflict, of resistance. Some of it seems to be without, but that would be of no consequence without this perception of continuing resistance within me, that there is a conflict within me. The idea that the conflict can be worked out, the idea that one side will overcome the other, all of you should by now be more or less disavowed of. You truly should. It's not a matter simply I'm going to do better. It's not a matter simply that one side's going to overcome the other. That accomplishes nothing. The closest it would seem to accomplish would be to turn someone into a horizontal fanatic. And all of you should have a pretty clear perception, if not nitty-gritty suspicion, that pursuing this does not turn one into a fanatic, does not turn one into an apostle or an evangelist. If you could find the room in this great castle, or if you could see that there are 3 princes, or 3 princesses, 3 princi, that there is not any longer just C and D going on internally, that there would be C, D, and E, which as long as you're binary, I can't really talk about it, so we're not going much further verbally. But I was strongly suggesting to you that it is an inconceivable condition, is why it's always been called mystical, astounding, enlightening, awakening, bewildering, that it's not suddenly that one side's overcome the other. When that seems to happen in people chemically, they do become fanatics of some stripe, if not religious politically, or just their own apparent stream of bad luck becomes their teaching. That I am absolutely convinced, there is no other doubt in my mind, this is right. The Bible, for instance, was written by God. He wrote it out on a typewriter and gave it to people. And what it says, it means literally. There is no room for discussion. A fanatic. That is what would happen if it were possible for the good to overcome the evil, or for the evil to overcome the good. It would be the same thing. It is not the eradication of one form of the internal resistance, but if there were 3, if there was a 3rd one plugged into this continuing appearance of resistance, appearance of an enemy, I ask you to stretch your brains. What would be going on? And the 3rd prince would not be a referee. At least any of you got some real quick voice that your partner pulls out about, he would not be the referee in a debating match. he would not be a UN observer between these two clashing forces. To say the very, very least, the whole situation has changed in a way that is not even binarily describable. Good has not overcome evil or vice versa. The appearance of resistance, the ostensible enemy, this whole scenario has gone into another dimension. I've got 4 or 5 things I think I can conjure up as I stand here that are related. Whenever you accept energy thought of all forms, ideas, opinions, teachings, maps, great religious insights, whatever, all energy, thought food from other sources, that is, from other people, and that includes the partner. You are attempting to ingest used food. I don't want to dwell on this and give anybody heartburn, but I think you'll admit, assuming that I'm giving a fair detailing here in the beginning, that if there is any market for used food, I would assume that you would not be in that market. That is not a fit occupation for a civilized, reasonable man or woman, as I know all of you are. Whatever you're taking from another person right now, just leave it at what I'm saying, at the level of yellow circuit food, like food-energy, or energy-food, or energy-thought, or thought-energy. You are dealing with used food, and such food will never, ever nourish higher circuits. It will never encourage AMV12. It is simply insufficient to cause any real change in a person. To produce the kind of food that is not used, it must come about through your own sight, through your own sounds, through your own touch, but it's got to come from bands of the spectrum that are outside that which is normally visible, audible, tactile. Is literally. It's what they've always been talking about as far as mystical experiences. The known spectrum, visible light, audible sound. If it falls within that range, it is used food. What you've got to produce, you've got to be able to see it, you've got to be able to hear it. I should have left it there, I guess. I'll throw in you got to be able to touch it, but don't worry. But you've got to be able to see it, and you've got to be able to hear it, and it has got to be, in its source, from areas outside the ordinary spectrum of visible light and audible sound. That is what humanity has always been speaking about of mystical experience. Because when it comes from that area, of course, you cannot tell somebody what you saw. Because in a sense, you did not see it. And if you tell them, then what they're going to get is used energy. If you tell them, the guide spoke to me, something happened to me and I fell out, and somebody talked to me, the great cosmic spirit, the great cosmic chief, somebody talked to me and they told me exactly what was going on. They told me everything I always wanted to know. Would you tell me? I'll be glad to. It is then, as soon as the person begins to speak, it has become used energy. And even if the person did see, if the person did achieve a consciousness outside the ordinary spectrum of sight and sound, As soon as they begin to relay it to another person, the other person in the same position, I start out telling you this part. They're taking in used food, no matter if you did experience something outside that realm, outside that spectrum. There's really no exception to this. I guess some of you already would think that what's been going on here, or what I talk about, is not on that same level. And you're right in that sense, and you're not completely right, though. It's really no benefit to try to describe that any further, except any of you that already had voices saying, well, you know, there's great teachings of great past spiritual masters, or even what you've been saying, you know, is it subject to the same thing? Yes and no. How about let's leave it at that? Let's go back to ordinary life. Leave us and what we're doing here out of it for the time being. Anything else you can come up with, whatever the words of wisdom your father or mother told you, whatever great ideas you've heard expressed by some rabbi, some priest, some guru, some mathematician, some philosopher, it is literally used energy. Of course, when you begin to see a little bit better, you know that they're not even responsible for it. But somebody appears to be the source of it. Whatever they tell you, no matter how astounding or how striking it seems to be when you first read it, when you first hear it, it is used food. Now, it serves a purpose. Everyone is operating on recycled energy, apparently. Remember, I asked you about that some weeks ago. How can that be? Except for the passing answer of saying, well, the sun is replenishing this. In a binary world, you can't go much further than that, because then you got to say, all right, what's replenishing the sun? So we don't want to hurt ourselves, binarily speaking, do we? I don't want to make anybody have unusual headaches. But at the isolated level that we seem to take ourselves, the ordinary discussions, or any discussion of reality being an arbitrary, isolated, artificial sectioning of reality to talk about this one thing, it would still appear as though everything is recycled. Even Newton's old great law of the figs, of physics. I certainly can stretch and reach for a joke at times. Anyway, about, energy is not created, neither is it destroyed. Only figs and prunes. But let's accept that appears to be true at a binary level right now, except for some strange areas in quantum physics that they're beginning to stumble on. But apparently, everything is here and it keeps recycling itself. You cannot activate the circuits in the body, in the brain. You cannot have a beneficial effect upon that AMV12 I've spoken of that is in the blood and is replenished and used in a certain way just to run you up to a ordinary level, to feed the brain up to line level consciousness and then nothing more. Using recycled energy, whether it be great words of Buddha, Abraham, Jehovah, God, Yogi Bear, Swami X, your father, or, sad to say, your own partner. It is an absolute scientific fact that only I am capable of pointing out at the present, but it is an absolute scientific fact. You cannot activate those circuits. It should almost be as plain as the curled up toes on the head primate. Because if it were true, why did you not activate in some way your own miraculous awakening before now? Between everyone hearing this tape, surely you have read, between you all, every mystical book worthy of its name, seen more mystical appearing people than me, long before you met me, had mystical conversations with yourself, But you've got to face the truth, or you should have faced the truth to even be here for several meetings, that it really didn't accomplish anything. Your feeling always was, there's a little piece of something I'm missing, and somebody knows it somewhere, and I'll find them, they'll tell me. You found people that said, hell, I'll tell you. And they told you. And based upon time and place and your own wiring, you heard somebody say, here's the secret, is blah, blah, blah. You went, well, okay. Or somebody said the secret is blah, blah, and you went, wow, is it? Ooh, I'll go and think about it. 2 days later, you forgot about it. It is simply the fact that it's so plain that no one can see it, since you're not arranged to see it, that this missing piece of information, the great secret method, that somebody somewhere knows, some group of men are doing, the great conspiracy of hiding it from ordinary humanity, whatever the story is that you seem to have become affixed to, you've had enough opportunities in the past that you've saved money somewhere, surely, to buy a $20 book that somebody said, you heard that this is the book. This will bring you into the new age. This explains the great ancient secrets in a way that you'll understand and you can use it. You sacrifice. You save up for the book. You steal it from a library. You send off for it and you have to wait 3 weeks standing by the mailbox. And you've never heard the piece of information. And I'm telling you why. Because whatever it was used. It was used energy, and that will not nourish. Scientific nutritional fact. You cannot nourish the circuits above line level. You cannot nourish the very circuits that are crying out to be fed, the ones that say, I want to know some great secret. The ones that in truth brought and will keep you here if you belong here. You cannot feed them off of used food and everything you get from any source other than you, not the partnership. It doesn't matter whether you are listening now and take you as being you, or whether it's the partner listening and takes as being you. Is why, if you notice, without me pointing it out continually, I want to say the partnership. So that strangles both of you. That includes both of you. That unless it is something that you have seen or heard or felt, touched, that is not used food, if you cannot produce that yourself, then this great miracle, the great epiphany, the great secret that everyone wants, you will never find. You keep thinking that someone knows it and someone will tell you, or you will find it written down finally and you'll be able in some way to decipher it. And you won't, because it's all used. It is sufficient to get the blood in its ordinary state up to your line level of consciousness. It is sufficient to make you educated, sophisticated. It is sufficient to make you believe that you are a seeker of great mystical truth. It is sufficient for all of that, but it was sufficient for that before you found this. And it's sufficient for everyone. It has got to be food that is unused. It cannot be recycled, and there is only one place to get it. Which I'm not, of course, really telling you much of anything as to where. But there's only one place to get it, and that's in there somewhere. You have got to see it. You have got to hear it. You have got to touch it yourself. And not only smart questions about which came first, the chicken or the omelet. I do not deal with those kind of dumb binary questions. How can I do it unless I can do it? Or if I could do it, then I could do what you're saying. Right. That's my kind of observation. Insofar as this great old question of how can I do it? It sounds like I couldn't do it unless I could do it. Or it sounds like I couldn't see it unless I can do it, and I can't do it unless I can see it. A couple of things. They can put in new dresses and new little suits. How about the yellow monkey wrench approach or method? I saw this one time and I never told anyone. It's not all that mystical. A great yellow monkey wrench. And what it has to do with is this, is inner perception. It includes everything that you have ever thought you thought about. Is every perception that you have at line level consciousness, with your ordinary blood, using your ordinary food. All of these perceptions are dual, of course, because they have to have a resistant side. There has to be a side within your own consciousness wherein your perception does not exist, or wherein your awareness that someone says my perception does not exist, if not out there, my partner says it. There has to be that to hold it up. There has to be that for it to fall within the realms of ordinary reality. It is a two-legged perception. Now with my yellow monkey wrench, what you do is tri-legged. I guess that'd be spelled T-R-I, I guess you could put a dash or not, L-E-G-G-I-T, or L-E-G-I-T. I can't worry about the spellings of all this. You can figure out which one is best. But you take a two-legged, which is any perception you got, it's dual, it is two-legged, and you learn how to use a yellow monkey wrench, and what you do is you force a third leg on it. It doesn't matter what the perception is. It doesn't matter whether it's religious, political, you're feeling toward your sexual partner, you're feeling toward your mother or father, or you're feeling toward your own partnership. Whatever it is, you've got to be close enough that once a fortnight, some of you get a glimpse that everything that goes on in me under ordinary conditions, which is everything other than things that you know are extraordinary. And by now you can taste those few little things. Anything of which I am aware is of a dual nature. It has got two legs to it. There is an up and down to it. There is a possibility and an impossibility aspect to it. There is a good side to it, a bad side to it. It is two-legged, and there is a way in which you can produce within yourself what amounts to a yellow monkey wrench. And you've got to find something beyond something that is not part of the duality of that perception. The good, the bad, the proper, the improper, the I will possibly do it to I won't do it. It is you and then the resistance to it. And it's as though you can take, I don't think I'll tell you where to look for it, you can take a third leg, and it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not just a renaming of one of the two legs, and it's almost as though from another universe, which is not that far away, of course, and you take a third leg, and before that little perception, that little dual-legged idea knows what happened, you're able to grab an unknown leg and force it onto it. Then you got something. You have got something that is stable. You have got something, I must tell you, it's no longer a two-legged chair with a third leg, any more than adding a third party to your partnership in some way becomes an intermediary between the first two. It is not then simply a erstwhile two-legged stool with a third one on it. If you can force a third leg, if you can third leg anything than what it was you thought you were perceiving, it's kaput. It goes into another area. All feelings that religion and mysticism has always talked about, of people suddenly being overcome, of feelings of goodwill, or suddenly being released from their old self, suddenly being cleansed of all their hatreds, of all the ambiguities of feelings they have toward their fellow man. It's all used energy being put in words but they're in the same category that I'm talking about, of being able to take anything, the dual feelings toward everything. It is a two-legged basis of all ordinary perception, and force a third leg on it, and don't bother to get in any discussion with you and your partner as to, well, what kind of third leg? What would be proper? There is no such thing as an improper third leg. None. Now, of course, some of you have a good memory. I pointed out to you many, many moons ago that everything has three legs. So it's a devilish trick to say to force a third leg on it. But notice, going about it through your ordinary daily attempts to think, you should see by now, does not really get one anywhere. So it's not a matter, the way I'm describing it now, or hinting, it's not simply a matter of suddenly being able to force yourself through some kind of trick to be able to see it all. But this is taking an active part insofar as line-level consciousness only sees two-thirds of reality. That is the maximum. It is also the minimum to pass for being horizontally sane. But it is also the maximum. That is all is ever seen as two-thirds of reality. All that is ever perceived are two princes in conflict. All that can be perceived is the feeling that there is goodness in the universe, proper behavior, proper forces at work, and then improper. Consciousness cannot conceive of a third one. What would it be? Your binary mind cannot say anything. Just say, all right, there's the gods and the anti-gods. There's the good and the evil. Any other variation. And for me to say there is a third one, always there, what in the hell can you call it? And the truth is, you can sit there, we can take a time out, and everybody go, Needless, or to say the least, nothing seems to readily spring to mind. Well, this is the third one, what in the world would he do? I mean, those two got it down. There's the good guys and the bad guys. What's left? It is there, and one approach other than to sitting around with the belief for a grilled cheese sandwich to fly into your mouth when you're hungry is to be able to find a third leg. And of course, I named it the Yellow Monkey Wrench, hint, hint, and to force that sucker on to whatever the perception is. Has anyone ever taken the time to find it curious of how much laughter week in and week out I seem to evoke? I say things I say. Because you got to admit, I do not run the risk of overheating myself going through theatrics and dramatics. I don't attempt to do imitations of Robin Williams or Henny Youngman. But does everybody find it curious how funny, such as me talking about taking a third leg and force it on a two-legged dual perception? Or some of you think you're sort of used to hearing me talk. If I was an ordinary person sitting there, that'd sound pretty strange. But up to that point, you thought that you sort of follow what I'm talking about in general sometimes, that all perceptions at line level consciousness at line level, all activity in here is of a dual nature. It is literally as though you could split the organ of perception at the yellow circuit level, that which is unique to man, that you could cut it in two, and for every yea there is a nay, for every good there is an evil, for every truth there is its opposite in any given case. That, what goes up must come down, is over here. part over here that's not considered is that that's not true. But as far as people can tell, it is true. So the other part is of no regard. It is the resistance of ignorance. If anybody says, hey, you can't prove to me what goes up must come down. And if you finally decided that they're serious, your feeling is, you know, the man's an idiot. I can't deal with it. There's nothing else to say. He is a member of the adjoining kingdom who are known for their stupidity. Everything that operates at line level is of a binary basis. It has its own built-in resistance. For a thing to be a fact, there has to be an anti-fact. For it to be true that what goes up must come down, there must be the tacit that no one thinks about, the tacit other side of it, the underbelly of truth, error. But it's there. There's a way in which you can find a kind of yellow monkey wrench. I'm not going to describe it any more than the rest of this sentence. And you can take any perception, including what you think of as feelings, and you can take a third leg, and it doesn't matter what it is, as long as from your perception, between you and the partner, that it does not fall in here, which gives you the rest of the world. Come up with a third leg. It doesn't matter what length it is, what color it is, what size or shape, and there's a way in which you can, as though with a yellow monkey wrench, and before it knows what happened, that poor helpless little binary concept, and you can go and you can stick a third leg on it, and when you do, you can go home and as though with a yellow monkey wrench, and before it knows what happened, that poor helpless little binary concept, and you can go and you can stick a third leg on it, and when you do, you can go home and give away all of your mystical books to the Salvation Army. There is another one. That I could talk about at great length, which I will probably get into if I decide still to give you a certain method that I mentioned several weeks ago that I've never really described, and I've never really given an outright kind of method of something to do, a specific thing that you can feel, that you can see, you can touch. It is getting closer to what many of you hoped and dreamed of many years ago, of a great mystical trick that you could get somewhere. I don't know how much of it, if any, I'm going to be inclined to do on tape. But this gets somewhere in the neighborhood. And so I'll just give you some of it in passing, a little bit. You could look at it as being the premeditated approach. And you can look at the premeditated approach. There are variations of this that I think I'll mention that going on in ordinary life, always have been going on. But both that to which I refer and the ordinary level, that you could look at as being two stages of people, apparently, if we're speaking that people are actually who's instead of what's, that people are not dealing with used food, if people did know what they were going to say next, if people were individual initial sources of energy, then you could look at this as being in two stages of people in a premeditated manner deciding or saying they decided to do something. Of course, the second stage has to be, for it to be a complete approach, is then to do it. In the ordinary world, this premeditated approach, believe it or not, has had a very long and continuing life without the second part ever coming to pass. I ask you again, out of, it's not left field, you think that there's only in baseball the right field, the left field, and the center field, and there's another one. I can't tell you the name of it because you wouldn't understand it. What could be a possible use in the ordinary world of prayer? I suggest to you, I'll give you a few seconds before I suggest, that in a sense, part of what prayer has played in the continuing transformation and feeding of life through man is that first stage. The attempt to engage in this premeditated approach. The continuing prayers, pleas, rhetorical inquiries to a God or the God somewhere. The kinds of prayers that humanity has always engaged in that are not necessarily done in a ritualistic form. That is, of people walking around attempting, as they call it, did I talk to God sometime? Or I'll be out in a situation, maybe a business situation, under very mundane circumstances. And this good religious person says, and I feel the pressures of the marketplace upon me, the need to close a deal, and I feel anger coming up toward people resisting me. I feel hostility arising when I and these other people had a distinct understanding and we got there to sign the papers and they changed the terms. And I felt great swells of anger arise. And even there in the midst of this great boardroom, I tried to pray to the gods. You know, don't let me be angry. Let me remember that life is short. My soul is immortal. Why should I be? Don't let me hate these people. You know, dear gods, help me to see the right way to act, the right way to respond to evil. That and down to the ritualistic spectrum, all the way through so-called prayer. What are people doing? We're not talking in kindergarten terms anymore. We're talking about the biochemical needs of life itself. What is possibly going on that has produced in man not just the idea of gods, which I told you where they are. They're right above the line there. That's as many gods as you need to know about. But an offshoot, prayer. Not just the praising of gods and the pleas of, oh gods, please don't let that mountain fall on me. Dear Lord, don't let that tornado come my way. Say amen. No, the kind where people apparently are engaged in the first part of this premeditated approach of repeating things. Dear gods, please help me to be more understanding. Dear gods, please help me to long only for a close relationship to higher forces, to you, the gods. Dear gods, please help me overcome my desire to drink every day, my desire to have sex with people with whom I have no official state-sanctioned connection. All right. I'm not going to stay on this much longer than I did the yellow monkey wrench. Someday soon I'm I am going to throw in some more about prayer, but I was wanting some of you people to try and pursue some of this on your own, even before, if nothing else, I may give it as a task. I'll assume that all of you on a good day can get past the quite real, quite necessary biochemical, genetic attachments you have, everybody, every walking nervous system, to the ideas of God's. Get past that and try and question. Try and get that yellow monkey wrench. And what is it for the health, for the chemical, the electrical health of the body of life, the body of man, could be going on that it makes people want to pray? Look at the words, the ones you've heard, the ones you grew up with, the ones you've heard in other religions, the ones that you may have thought in some way spontaneously sprang from your own heart and breast and soul in some times past. The attempt in some way to communicate with God, to ask for help. Look at the words themselves and try to get a feel, try to get past that binary notion that this is in some way a good idea as opposed to a bad idea, a good approach as opposed to a bad approach. What is going on? And I was trying to get you started on one foot even now. From one particular view, it is like the first stage of the premeditated approach. And I'm going to let that go for the time being and get to people attempting this. There's a way in which to actually use this premeditated approach. Now, part of it I've described sort of in jocular, apparently jocular terms, like fake it till you make it. Or me telling those seriously involved is quit eating meat, quit eating dead creatures, quit eating the flesh of other animals of all kinds. And I told you it was not moral, I told you it was not religious, and I also told you for all kinds of reasons. Part of them are my own reasons. My own reasons are your reasons. My reasons are life's reasons. There was a shortcut that I told you as a literal fact. I assure you, I give you my word, without any doubt. If you got enough above that line, if you got enough out of the binary kingdom of the regal collusion, on your own, right, in discussion, if I'd never mentioned it, each and every one of you would have finally stopped eating meat. You would have just stopped. But what few things I can directly control that is reasonable for me to attempt to effect in you, and that I know the specific immediate consequences, I did you a favor. Although I know that many of you still have the partner that cries out, God damn, I'd love a hamburger. You would have gotten to the point that you would have stopped eating it. And you would have, if I'd never said it. I simply saved you a whole lot of time. No, that's all right, I know, don't thank me. Or me saying that you cannot constantly drink alcohol. And I know there are many people that found a good drink after work be quite in order. I don't have anything morally or physically against drinking. But if I'd never said a word, those of you that every afternoon were having 2 or 3 drinks, or before dinner we're having a bottle of wine 6 or 7 days a week, and that you immediately felt as though you missed it. Of course, it's a little dirty when I told everybody, look, you got to quit eating meat and you got to quit drinking booze. And it's got nothing to do with religion or morality. That's kind of dirty to start with. Because at the ordinary level, people would take if I said, listen, I have spoken directly to the gods, or I refer you back to all the greatly respected ancient literatures. Look, all religions say, or most of them say that you shouldn't drink, and a whole bunch of them say you shouldn't eat meats, or some say you shouldn't eat these kind of meats, and no one says this kind of meat. Listen, we're going to cover it all. We're not going to eat any. But it's religious. Don't blame me. A lot of you in the beginning would have taken that better. You and the partner would have went, well, you got to suffer to sing the blues. I mean, you got to suffer. You got to suffer to do better. You got to suffer. I guess I should have been nicer about it and told you in the beginning there was some kind of religious thing. At any rate, all of you would have eventually if you had ever gotten above the binary level, all of you eventually would have stopped regular drinking. You would have just stopped it. There wouldn't have been the voices of the gods, there would have been no moral constraints suddenly fall upon you from the heavens. You would have simply stopped. I simply saved you a whole lot of time. Plus I said some of this is selfish, because I'd be wasting my time with anybody that was drinking every day. You just can't do it. It's just a waste of time. The premeditated approach is you predetermine that you're going to do something. But if you're still operating on the binary level, then this predetermination is predicated upon the possibility that I'll fail. Because for years I've been saying, I'm going to quit eating after 10 o'clock at night. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to get more exercise. I'm going to quit drinking. So I've predetermined things in the past. I've told myself I'm going to do so-and-so. As soon as you say I'm going to do so-and-so at the ordinary level, the partner says, no, we ain't. Or, if it still helps you look at it this way, if it seems as though the partner says, hey, let's do so-and-so, you may go, yeah, it sounds right. And to yourself, Soto voice, to where the partner can't hear it, you go, I know I can't, or good luck. But what I'm talking about of the premeditated approach is you predetermine to yourself that this is what I will do, but it's beyond the realm of a possible failure. The second stage right now is like, instead of stage 1 and 2, it's like stage 1 and then 1.5. The second stage is the absolute acknowledgement that I can't do this right now. But that's the beginning and the end of it. It's not after the first stage that many people, including ordinary people, through prayer, through meditation, through self-help programs, the first stage is the apparent predetermining, the premeditated decision that I will do so-and-so. Then they fail. Stage 2 never happens. Nobody ever notices it. If they do, then it runs back to stage 1, that, somebody resisted me. I'm too weak. I resisted myself. They do not notice the lack of success. They're not supposed to, because the predetermining at that level is the success. That is, I'm suffering. That's the success. Life is happy. You're doing your part. I'm going to lose weight, damn it, and I can't. I'm going to quit drinking, and I can't. That's success. That is the height of morality for life. What you can do, though, now, the first stage predetermined, I'm going to do so-and-so, is then the second stage is not just success, because if it's success, you would not be trying to predetermine it. That is, people who don't drink do not sit around and decide to give up drinking. You're predetermined to do so-and-so, and then as the absolute acknowledgement that I can't do it, for the time being, end of subject. Except I have predetermined, I am premeditated, in a premeditated sense, I am deciding I'm going to do so-and-so, part 1. Part 1.5 is right now I can't do it. Words are completely falling apart here. But 1.5 is, right now I can't do it, in the subject. Not a period, since I always tell you not to do periods, but by God, it's the world's most stringent comma. It's a real hard comma. It's very close to, if you could take this into 3 dimensions, it's very close to fuck it. Not forget it. Because you still got the first stage that I have predetermined there's something I should be doing. I simply know it. Or I've decided I'm going to do it. 1.5, because you can get to the second stage, is right now. No discussion, no suffering. I'm not going to talk to it with a partner. I'm not going to entertain anybody talking about it. I simply am aware. I acknowledge the fact, as close as I can come on 3 legs, that right now I can't do it, For the time being, end of subject at the 1.5 part. Nothing to discuss, nothing to suffer over. I've determined I'm going to do it. It is on my agenda. Right now I can't do it. And you, for the time being, it is as though you would just walk away. That is getting close to being able to premeditate what you do. That was not an attempt at barnyard humor. Since I pushed words to their limit, I'll take it right quick, a little more limit. Of course, the real execution of the premeditated method would be absolutely no premeditation. Or, you can look at it another way, is you'd predetermine to do something and immediately do it. And be able to do it so fast that in a sense, you wouldn't even be aware of the fact that I predetermined I was going to do that. Can anybody hear that that is the third side of the coin of don't tell yourself what you're going to do? It is only at the binary level that you have to tell yourself what you're going to do because you know that you're not. Or to be charitable, it is only at the binary level that you tell yourself what you're going to do because you know that there is an equal amount of resistance lurking. You know that there's an enemy. You know that there's somebody, if not out there, in here, that as soon as you say I'm going to do it, you're going to hear voices go, say what? Huh. Who you fooling? This is like a third side of that coin, would be to really predetermine what you're going to do, to act in a premeditated manner and then do it, but it would all happen in such a manner that somebody said, did you plan to do that? Assuming that somebody could talk to you, that you would listen, and they said, did you plan to do that? And to keep from lying to them, you'd tell them no. Or to really keep from lying to them, you'd pretend that you were deaf. In my continuing, I did this last week, in my continuing search out in the ordinary world to find usable examples, I perchance were listening to either the radio or the TV, and I heard someone speaking about a discussion between a reporter and the reportee. Does anyone ever wonder why you have to have reporters? If you don't think that C and D is necessary, why do they have to have somebody go up to somebody with a microphone and say, sir, would you answer this question? Why don't they call the guy there and say, hey, we're going to turn on the cameras here and we'll get you on the news and you tell us about this. You got to have another party, a reporter. If it's a print media, you got to have an anchor person, my Eyewitness News, or somebody to say, here, tell us this. At any rate, I was listening. A man in the airline industry was responding. This was all about air safety. And he says, and I more or less quote, everything is fine in the picture of airline safety until you put in the human element. I take it you follow me. They had been discussing, you know, the research, the development, the great progress in materials, the testing done before airplanes are ever put on sale, put into use, and that everything in the complete picture, the research, the construction, the testing of airplanes, the whole picture in the airline industry is fine until you put in the human element. And it cannot be conceived, not on a contemporaneous basis, not a simultaneous basis, that all that sounds to be correct, that it's got to be correct. Airplanes don't crash themselves nowadays. You know, computers put together by a reputable company, they don't suddenly turn on itself. Computers don't have a partner. They don't say, hey, let's glitch up this whole thing and fuck these people up. An airplane that was designed, constructed correctly, it does not fly through the air and suddenly have a nervous breakdown. Very unlikely. The fault, the glitch is the human element. And everybody goes, say amen, my. And there cannot be a simultaneous awareness of the simple, plain, as the wart on your toe fact, that there would be no airline picture without the human element. So how can you have this apparently closed, this looped system, that human consciousness can come in and isolate reality at any given point and say, I'm assuming all of you followed, I didn't sketch all the details of this thing about airlines, but it could be anything nowadays in this great technical world, that all of this, the complete picture in this field, everything goes along fine until you put in the human element. You know, and that's, of course, tacitly what they're saying. That's when you got problems. But there's a closed system because you would not have the airline industry, the computer field. They can say that about medicine. That now with all the machinery, with all the mechanical testing, the scientific, untouched by human hands testing they can do, machine-assisted surgery, that nowadays medical treatment is in splendid health. The greatest thing you got to watch for, though, is the human element. And everybody is built to respond, yes, yes, notwithstanding the fact that there would not be anything that a human could talk about were it not for the human element. There's nowhere to go. That is of no importance whatsoever. You're simply running words around in some kind of circle. And that's not true. The picture of airline safety is a fine picture until you put in the human element. And there would be no airline industry. There would be no airplanes. There would be nobody talking about airline safety without the human element. It came from the human element. Not only does that not really make any sense or be of any importance, I can't think about it at the same time I'm thinking about how true it is. There's the human element that is the fly in the pretty picture, the splendid picture of airline safety. I'll leave you with a question before I read it. I was going to read some of the questions. I may turn this into a task. But I'll go ahead and throw it out to you, since I threw out to you several weeks ago, if it moves, poke it. I would have everybody turn in what they think that might have meant, based upon some of the erotic laughter I heard. What lusty laughter. What is there to actually resist within a closed system? I'm going to I want to read to you some of what I've been holding on here for several weeks. How come men seem to value individuality? From doing your own thing to marching to the beat of a different drummer, the iconoclasts persist in mild to extreme degrees. Does everyone hear the question? All right. The idea of individuality, the idea that in some way it would be good to do your own thing, or there's something laudable about those marching to a different beat, you've got to understand that there are limits to that. There are even groups of people, that is, apparent societies, people who have a different genetic wiring right now, that do not value that, contraire. But back to the kind of group from whence we all cometh, which is the kind of source of these ideas, and of course the source of the questions, I will point out to you that the ordinary people, the ordinary life's overall growth mass, those not involved with doing your own thing, those not apparently enchanted with a stroll to a different drummer. While those that apparently are identified as being the individualist to varying degrees, but those that apparently are identified as being the individualist could be looked at vis-a-vis as life's energy as opposed to its simple growth mass, and they are both necessary. And I'm in no way putting right now a value judgment on what those are normally referred to and thought of historically as being individualist. But they do apparently stand out, do they not? Who wants to read an autobiography of John Q. Public? And the advertisement says, a man who lived a life no more exciting than yours, assuming that you are a CPA from Cleveland and the furthest you've ever been away from home was to Indianapolis, and you considered that to be an almost mind-shattering experience, and after that you never went more than 5 miles from your house. If you're that kind of person, then this new biography, autobiography of John Q. Public, this man led your kind of life. I mean, we'll assume that you are not going to burn up your tires getting to the nearest bookstore to buy that book. Who wants to read the autobiography of Sarah P. Common, John Q. Public, Fred L. Everyman? Nobody. So whoever it is that even reasonable publishers decide to sign up for their autobiography or their biography, and that somebody bothers to review it in the New York Times, and you bother to read the review, and you might even think, I wouldn't mind reading the autobiography of Elizabeth Taylor, of Richard Nixon, Charles Colson, just somebody I've heard about. They could not have lived a life as dull as mine. In some way, they were an individual. But I've never heard of them. You don't analyze it, it's just simply, they are not part of the mass growth. They seem like they're more of the energy. They seem to have had some impact in some small area, enough that I've heard of them, enough that I hear they have an autobiography, and it's sufficient to make me think if I ever run across it in a paperback, if I run across it cheap enough, I might read that. They are both necessary, but also all of you should know this, they're parts of the world, they're parts of life's body that are human. That individuality is not, up until today, still going on, large segments of life's body, that is, parts of humanity, that individuality is not seen as being a positive attribute. I might also point out to you, which I think I've done. I hate it when I sound ordinary. I know damn well I've done it. I don't think I've done it, but I have pointed out to you, and at least en passant, that those parts of the world where individuality is not considered to be a positive attribute, those people are not running with the wolf pack. They are not where you would want to move right now to find better employment. They are not in the avant-garde of humanity. They simply are not. The best they can do is try and steal what we are doing, since right now we are at the avant-garde. And the individuality here is accepted as being quite good, all the way from, well, at least it runs from being accepted to being applauded. But there are parts of the world, large parts of the world, as I assume you all know, that you're not supposed to be individual. It seems offensive. It seems to be not in the best interest of everyone. But those people are still in a time zone far behind us. But also, those kind of places, it's safer to walk in the streets. They don't have people committing atrocities with chainsaws. They don't have 7-Eleven stores robbed every 2 minutes. It's safe to walk down their streets, their large municipalities at midnight. Whereas here, you got a price you pay for that. The more alive it is, the more that the feeling that individuality is of some necessity, or at least is quite acceptable. Like everything else, is connected to everything else. Would you say something else again about the apparent energy exchange between a performer and the audience? Let me refer you back. That continues to be, I know, a question that interests some of you, and there's a lot to learn from that, and it has almost nothing to do with show business. But there is a continuing form of entertainment going on, not just me standing here and you sitting out there, or you sitting out there seeing this on tape. It's not just Duran Duran on stage or Simple Minds on stage. It's not just Ernest Angley or the Pope standing up on a balcony and people seem to be the audience. There are audiences. There is a showbiz phenomenon and dynamics going on between two people. Stand around a party, stand around the office and watch. And there are people who apparently are the entertainers, and there are those of the audience, and they always find each other. Since you can't dance alone in this life, not in the binary world, you have to get into another world to be able to satisfactorily dance alone. But then people think that they see that you're dancing with somebody, but that's another story. I refer you back to the transfer of heat, which is very aligned with my descriptions of there being dominant and submissive peoples. But there is also a transfer of heat, that the entertainer seems to be the warmer of the two, and the audience seems to be those who want to be heated up. It is an absolute exchange. And the entertainers, after a certain point, always express a distinct sensation that I have been drained. But they love me so much it's worth it. Did you hear? You hear they're still out there applauding. 3 encores tonight. Listen at them. But boy, I'm whipped. I got to lay down for about 2 or 3 minutes or give me a glass of champagne. There is a heat exchange that goes on. There's a heat exchange that goes on between 2 people talking in the Waffle House, 2 people discussing politics. But if you look, this is the norm, is everywhere an entertainer goes. Entertainer, you may read warmer person, dominant, more dominant. This is all relative to his audience now. But everywhere that he goes, suddenly he finds a cooler person. He finds an audience. Or as always in this great binary world, turn it around. There are people who are an audience looking to be entertained. They are in the majority, it would appear, in a binary, from a binary view. But they find somebody. You find 2 people who are audiences, if they accidentally, which it happens in life because anything possible will happen, they end up, one audience is trying to pick up another audience at a bar. It doesn't take them normally but a few seconds, and they both understand something's wrong. Or 2 entertainers try to pick up each other. Hi, sweetie, what's happening? It turns out she's an entertainer. They suddenly both head for the restroom. They go, hey, I'll meet you back here in a second. And they're both gone. And they go off and they find an audience. And those are 2 audiences, and they start speaking to each other, and they realize, you ain't going to entertain me. I'm not going to get any heat from you. They suddenly, I mean suddenly, they look off and there's somebody else to talk to, or suddenly they turn around when they realize they don't know what it is, but just, she or he's not my type. They suddenly turn around and they feel it. Right behind them, when they were sitting here trying to talk to this first audience in a mistaken manner and realize that didn't work, they suddenly turn around and right there beside them, right behind them, and they realize immediately, I looked in the wrong direction, because here's somebody that says, and what's your sign? Buy you a drink, come here often, etc. It has to do with the biochemical composition of the people. Now, I've had several questions that I don't think I brought them tonight, but people asking, how is it that somebody can apparently be an audience at one time and then be an entertainer? Or why is it that somebody can apparently, they, took what I said to be literal at the time, that somebody appears to be dominant. I can see them as being dominant, or I feel like I'm a dominant type. But there's somebody else around whom I am submissive. Tell me something new. It's not stagnant or to be dead. That anybody that apparently is an entertainer, anybody that apparently is dominant, will assume theoretically, just trust me, that there's somebody on this planet more dominant than you. That's like the old joke about, well, if you ain't Bad John, I ain't going to be when he gets here. That you may think you're the baddest ass in the world if you're a man, but there's somebody somewhere that would kick you around the room. You may feel as though I am the pushiest human, I don't take crap off anybody. And there's somebody in this world that you would take crap off of just as soon as you got within 10 feet of them. You just realize, uh-oh. But those who are submissive, that you might think, listen, I'm submissive, just everybody runs all over me. You don't notice that there's some people you run all over. But you are wired up, the chemical composition of you is such that you only notice it from one side or the other. There's always somebody that you're kicking around. There's always somebody that you're around that is cooler than you. There's always somebody around that plays audience to you. It could just be that you go to them and say, boy, everybody picks on me, everybody kicks me around. I don't know why I let people do that. I'm just too submissive. Even if that's your story, that's your stick, that's your entertainment, and you got somebody somewhere that will listen to that. They're your audience to hear you crying about being an audience. They submit to you, and your dominant stick in this case is you telling them how you are too submissive. But please note that even when apparently it changes, that we could say it's all relative, which is too easy to say because the binary mind goes, how true, say amen, amen. And it really doesn't tell you anything. But you cannot say that anybody, which I am not saying, and the binary mind wants to take it one way or the other, that's the way it's fixed up. There are dominant types, or more dominant types, and there are more submissive types. There are people who are more the entertainer and those who are more the audience. But it is not stagnant. Life is not stagnant. It is a matter of a continuing transition. And everybody is an audience to somebody. And everybody is an entertainer to somebody. Everybody is hotter than somebody else around them. That they are always feeding them more energy. Apparently. But those same people have somebody else that they apparently go to. Of course, nobody thinks about it this way, but they go to them to receive energy, to receive heat. Whether it's apparently in the form of emotions, passions, whether apparently it's in the form of information, advice. It is a continuum. But to say that you may feel that you are more of a dominant type, that may be quite correct. Vis-a-vis your milieu, vis-a-vis the place in the grid in which you are wired up, that you apparently play the dominant type more than you do the submissive type. But somewhere in that system, you're submitting to somebody. But if you feel I'm always an audience, I never get to get on, you're on to somebody. I'm just reading parts of this. At one time you said something about people being hung up on being, quote, good people, and that was not what this was all about, although a piece of that was necessary to be attracted to this. Well, I even said more than that. I've said things in the past that just attempt the belief that you should be a good person is not what this was about. But I have also pointed out that there's a way in which you eventually have to become religious without that word to continue this. But at any rate, I'm going to try to use the way in which they ask it. That I said that a piece of being a good person in some way was necessary to continue this. If that's all that's true, does that mean there is no morality? Then there are no good works. What they're asking is, what does all this mean, or how could you explain this? That would apparently say that there is no kind of morality. All right, in a sense, I'm going to answer this pretty quick because I could talk about it forever. If you are wired up that the idea of being a good person seems to be your driving force, that seems to be what attracted you to this, and that seems to be that which runs through your wiring system continually. It is a hindrance. It has nothing to do with this, because the real morality of it is to be able to offer no hindrance whatsoever, even if it's tacit, even if it's secret in your own head, is to offer no resistance to life's growth. That is real morality. That is as close as I care to describe it to you tonight, that I mentioned to you some weeks back, that the only true morality, as harsh as this can sound to pristine, virgin, ordinary ears, the only morality that life has is that which is profitable to its health, to its growth. As far as I care to go into it verbally right now, the closest thing that I could describe to you right now is morality on your part of being a good person, is for you to offer no hindrance, even if it's in the secret quietness of your head, that you're offering no hindrance to life's growth. That you are offering, you're entertaining no resistance that wants to speak through you, whether it stays up here or whether it comes out your mouth, whether it comes out your limbs, whether it comes out your body through action, is for you to offer no resistance to life's growth. Because life knows what it's doing. Life is moral. It is man that sees immorality. And you personally, I'm telling you now, are engaged in immorality to resist life's growth. I could put it a little bit further as far as goodness, since they use that word several times in here about being a good person and mention goodness several times. That's not my kind of word, I guess you noticed, but real goodness would be, there's reality behind it, but real goodness would be, it would be beyond the ordinary confines of C and D. Because you could not have anything that would resemble the reality of goodness as long as it was in the hands, as long as it was limited to the collusion between C and D. Because for every goodness there is a non-goodness. For every goodness, half of it is unknowingly its own opposite. That everything that C does is in collusion with D. And that which appears to be good is half not good by its own definition. You just can't see it by its own reality. Real goodness could not be subject to the confines of the limitations of the binary world, because then it's not goodness. It's a temporary perception on one person's part. It's one half of that mechanical wiring system of a brain that says this is good. Real goodness couldn't be limited to that. If you followed into this, I assume you'd also see that real goodness can't really be described. Yeah, it can. I did. Is you can't offer any resistance. What I mean it can't be described. I just described it. Of course, I guess somebody might wonder, the trick is being able to do it, right? Don't bug me with those kind of simple questions. Regarding last week's task, I got several notes I looked at before I came out. I was not successful in my attempt to conceive of something that cannot be named. I did manage an observation, however. It does not appear to be possible to think of anything that cannot be named. Several of you wrote me stuff similar to that. You're incorrect. Now, I didn't pick on just one person that wrote this, because you might have thought that in some way that was a purpose. And I've told you before, whatever seems to be an immediate purpose or an immediate revelation of any kind from these tasks, just forget that. The first one, just cast it aside. If it tastes real good or seems real nice, swallow and smile, but press on. But some of you thought that that the purpose was somewhere around, showing you that you cannot think of something that can't be named. It's impossible. If you can't name it, you can't perceive it. And that's not correct. That is not correct. Think about the yellow monkey range. But it is not correct. It sounds correct. It even sounds like it might be in line with the kinds of attacks that I've apparently made upon the great human language and words. But to say that it appears to be impossible to think of something that cannot be named is not correct. If that were correct, I wouldn't be staying here. I wouldn't have anything to say to you. Here's one I think I'm just going to read part of. Considering the beginnings of historical religion, it appears to me that starting a new religion can oftentimes be fatal. Of course, I am not referring to ordinary martyrs who certainly must have served a useful purpose, but I was thinking about those people that would seem to be of an inner group at the beginnings of the religion who understood, and to some degree, what was going on. I'm rewriting some of this as I read, in case you guys don't know it. What if these people of the inner group who died while not intending to die? What if they were not even intended to die, at least not specifically, but were actually engaged in transforming energy of such power and intensity that they were destroyed in the process? You could say that these deaths were a byproduct of energy transformation. In other words, could it be that they got so hot that it killed them? I want you to try a task. It's been some weeks ago since I brought up this idea, but enough of you heard some things then. I want you to see on your own, if you find anything worthwhile to report to me, send me a note about it. But see if you can find any symbiotic relationship, any possible symbiotic relationship between you and the partner. Now remember what a symbiotic relationship is, or go look in the dictionary. Mutually beneficial, but to a degree parasitic. It's a two-way parasitic street. Can you perceive of any possible symbiotic relationship in the partnership?